Why would you hollow out the resources there and the people that are enforcing the Bureau of Defense rule when we have these terrible numbers of exploitation of students?
Well, and my point is that we shouldn't just focus on those schools. I do know that I totally agree with you. There are some scam universities out there.
Well, why would you hollow out the people who are supposed to enforce it?
Because I think we're putting other measures in place. But the scam...
Give me an idea of what you're putting in place that's better than the Bureau of Defense rule.
Well, we just talked a little bit about FAFSA. It's the education up front. So that
I'm talking about the victims, the ones who are already victims. They're in debt by tens of thousands of dollars. They're living in their parents' basement. They have no place to turn. And you're telling me the FAFSA form application is going to help them? How can it help them?
And that's not in place yet, but I think that's going to be very, very helpful. Here's the other thing. Where are our guidance counselors in high schools? Who are they talking to?
I think that
they need to be totally informed, and I think they need to look at the cost of education.
You're cutting the number of counselors in these schools at the same time.
Well, the counselors that are doing their jobs can provide information to these students.
There aren't enough of them. That's the point I'm making, and the situation is terrible for these students. First-generation students who are being exploited by these schools, they need your protection. They need our protection. They deserve it. They're doing the right thing. And unfortunately, you're reducing the number of people to enforce the law.
Democrats in the Senate are cross-examining Donald Trump's cabinet members, continue to expose some of the unlawful conduct, particularly the impoundment of funds that were meant to go to places like the Department of Education. So on Tuesday, the Secretary of Education, though it pains me to say that, Linda McMahon, was testifying before the Senate. Watch Democratic Senator Murray's questions, making it very clear that the funds were appropriated to go to the Department of Education, and they're not going there. Here, play this clip.
For example, your FY26 budget request zeroes out dedicated funding for literacy education programs, and your operating plan for this year describes this funding as unallocated. So will you allocate the $220 million for literacy programs that Congress appropriated for FY25?
Well, Senator, as I mentioned earlier, we are looking at the unallocated dollars now to determine which of those programs we can best spend those dollars on. And I'll be happy to get back to you. And we want to work with Congress on those unallocated dollars to see where they could be spent the best.
Well, what is your plan to make sure that that funding actually gets to the schools and students it was intended to support? We're running out of time here.
Well, to look at those programs and then to allocate them to the states if those programs we believe is the best interest.
Those funds were appropriated by Congress. Your department was to allocate them, and it really looks to me like the department is illegally impounding funding that would help our students succeed with plans that don't exist and just day after day going by here, and that's our concern.
Well, let us work more with you as we update those allocations, as we did before.
When do you plan to have those funds out by?
Well, the funds that we are approving will go out in this year.
Like in this next month or?
In the fiscal year.
You're running out of time. So we need to see what the plan is. If you could provide.
Yes.
Okay.
Next up, you have Democratic Senator Murphy asking her, what authority do you have to do this? What makes you think you're able to engage in the types of conduct you are? Here, play this clip.
To understand what the Department of Education is doing with respect to the threats you've made against institutions of higher education. In the letter that you sent to Harvard, demanding that they make certain changes, you told them that they had to end all of their diversity programs, but that they had to institute viewpoint diversity. That doesn't seem to make sense. How do you tell them to end all their diversity programs? And we assume that this is a mandate that you will make of other schools as well. How do you ask them to end diversity programs while instituting viewpoint diversity? Those seems to be totally contradictory.
No, the diversity programs that we've asked and demanded to be eliminated were the DEI, where they were those programs actually were pitting one group against another.
Isn't viewpoint diversity a diversity program?
A viewpoint diversity is exchange of ideas that's actually better. Absolutely. Now here, because Harvard only has 3% by its own numbers, 3% conservative faculty. Do you think they are allowing enough of viewpoint diversity through that teaching?
Where in the statute does it give you the ability to cut off federal funding for a university based upon your decision, your determination that they don't have viewpoint diversity? Can you cite to a statute, an authority that Congress has given you to micromanage the viewpoint diversity of a college?
Well, certainly now let's back up.
Well, no. I think that's really important. I'm going to answer your question. Can you cite a statute? Because you can't cut off funding for universities unless you have a statutory authorization to do so. So what statute gives you the right to tell any university that they have to have a certain mixture of viewpoints?
So here's what happened with Harvard.
No, it's pretty simple. I don't mean to provide being hostile.
Well, I have to give you some.
I think you have to cite the statute.
The statute's Title VI. These were civil rights violations. That is why we filed a case and defunded or stopped the funding for a while for Harvard, as well as we did Columbia. And in that conversation with them, we talked about different things that they should do coming back to the table to make their programming better. The president of Columbia absolutely indicated, as well as the president of Harvard, that they needed to do things on their campus to eliminate anti-Semitism. That was kind of the crux of what brought us into talking to the different universities. And then we sat down with them to say, okay, these are other issues that you need to address on your campus because you do receive federal funding. Under federal funding, if you are breaking the law, which they did under Title VI.
I don't understand any conception of civil rights law to give you the authorization to micromanage viewpoint diversity on campus. That's not authorized under the civil rights title provided to you by the United States Congress. Thank you very much.
Senator Merkley.
Using a civil rights statute to attack diversity and civil rights. I don't think George Orwell could write that. Let's bring in the president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randi Weingarten. You're seeing that hearing taking place on Tuesday. I guess first, your immediate reaction to the hearing that's been taking place. Then I want to talk about the disastrous budget bill's impact on education.
So, first off, thank you for having me. But let me take a step back, which is that these laws were passed, 60, 70 years ago, because the country, from before the Civil War, we had a constitution that initially said someone who was a slave had no rights to vote and was considered a 3/5 person. And we have been, over the course of close to 250 years, attempting to create equality of all, opportunity of all. That is what the civil rights laws were about, to say, if people don't have an equal opportunity, then there needs to be ways to create that opportunity. So what Linda McMahon is doing is just basically throwing out those laws and essentially saying that they are going to weaponize the legal mechanics, but throw out the reason we had those laws. It's not just Orwellian. It's so mind-boggling because it just assumes that no one reads, writes, or thinks about what we need to do in terms of opportunity. In listening to the questions and listening to her answers, I'm just blown away by the dehumanization and the weaponization of a law that was about equal opportunity that's now being turned on its head.
You and I spoke about 2 months ago. Where are we today versus where we are then?
So, I'm both more hopeful and more fearful at the same time. When I say I'm more hopeful, I mean, it is exactly been what we said 2 months ago, but they have revealed themselves more, meaning at that point, They were starting to break a lot of things, both in terms of the federal government. Let's just talk about education. They tried to condition aid. They tried to stop appropriations. They tried to basically, say that anything any of us did that actually met the needs of children, or if we said if we said to a child, how are you doing today, somebody could have construed that to be DEI. It's ridiculous on its face. If we taught about Jim Crow, somebody could say, you could take all of our federal funding away from either colleges or from K-12. If we said, if there was an anti-Semitic incident on campus, which there have been many, and which we need to do a much better job, creating a safe and welcoming environment, you could take away huge research funding. So basically, they were breaking a lot of things and ignoring Congress and defying the courts. And slowly, the courts have basically said, no, you can't do that. And more often than not, the Trump administration is now listening to what the courts are saying. They'll appeal or they won't appeal, but they have not actually completely disrupted this school year, at least in terms of K-12. So, but more important than that, equally important to that, people finally are saying, on here, like, we didn't vote to get rid of 14 million people being off their health care. We didn't vote to get rid of basically every single federal dollar that goes in to help kids read or to help kids who have disabilities. Or we didn't, this is not what we voted for. We voted for you, Donald Trump, to help us have a better economy, to help us have a better life, not a worse life. So I would say we've slowed them down in terms of the breaking of government and the breaking of things to make it so completely chaotic. And there's also a lot of people on the ground in communities all across the country that are saying, this is not America. This is not what we wanted. And in a couple of weeks, we're going to have yet another very big protest. So think about what's going to happen. Donald Trump, on his birthday, is going to have a military parade in Washington. He's cut all this funding, or wants to cut all this funding for people on healthcare or people who need nutritious meals, but he's finding a way to pay for a military parade for his birthday. And then all across the rest of the country, there's going to be what an eighth grader in one of the protests I've seen has a great sign that says, I've learned in school that presidents are not kings. And that's what the people around the country are going to be saying as Donald Trump is having his military parade.
The No Kings protest, June 14th. We'll be covering it here on the MeidasTouch Network. Finally, before we wrap, talk to us about the American Federation of Teachers, what you are all doing right now to kind of fight back, and what you want others to know about your efforts. So,
number one, this fight back can't just be a fight back. People who voted for Donald Trump, I'm putting aside people who are just, people who will always support anything that he says. I'm talking about the people at the last minute who made a difference and voted for Donald Trump. They voted for him to make a difference in their lives. They thought that he would actually make the economy work for working class people. And I think we all have to not only fight for democracy, but actually have to fight for an America that's going to help working class people. So for me, I think there should be a tax cut for working class people. I think we should have a tax cut to ensure that the first dollars that it really costs to live for working class folk, that should be the tax cut, not a tax cut that prefers people who have passive income that have gained gazillions of dollars on that passive income. Number two, we have to fight to make sure that there's a voice for everyone. And that's what it means to have a democracy that works. That's why we're going to the courts, but the court of public opinion. That's why we have education, to actually make sure that people can problem solve, critically think. Our kids have the tools that they need for the future. So when we fight for funding for that, we don't want a piggy bank that takes the funding away for private schools. People want to send their kids to private schools. They have a right to do it. But we need the money for public schools. We need the money for kids with disabilities. We need the money for kids who are poor. We need the money for kids who want to go into career tech ed. We need the money for research and science to solve cancer. So we need to actually make sure that people understand that our fight is not against Donald Trump. Our fight is for people to have a better life. That's what America is. And our fight is focused on the economy and on democracy to do that. That's what America's teachers are doing. That's what America's nurses are doing. We are fighting for people to be able to thrive, particularly our children.
Randi Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers. We'll check back in a month. Thank you for everything you do. Everybody hit subscribe. Let's get to 5 million subscribers.
Can't get enough Meidas? Check out the Meidas Plus Substack for ad-free articles, reports, podcasts, daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, and more. Sign up for free now at MeidasPlus.com.